Imagine a 2,000-mile journey across a pathless wilderness. No roads, no rest, and only a thick layer of dust between you and the burning sun. In Hollywood, the stagecoach is a symbol of adventure. But in the 1860s, it was a rolling nightmare known as a bone shaker. And for 60 cents a mile, it was the only way west. At the heart of this ordeal was the Concord coach. Built from white oak and iron, it didn't have springs. Instead, the body sat on massive leather straps called thoroughbraces. This allowed the coach to swing back and forth, absorbing the brutal ruts of the trail. But it came with a price. Travelers didn't get road sick, they got seasick, tossed like a rowboat in a storm while sitting on hard leather benches. This is the story of the vehicle that built the American West, not through comfort, but through sheer engineering brilliance and unbreakable construction. This is the Concord coach. The Concord coach was born in an unlikely place. Concord, New Hampshire, over 2,000 miles from the western frontier, it would come to define. In 1813, a wheelwright named Louis Downing opened a small workshop, building farm wagons and carriages for New England's rocky roads. But in 1827, everything changed. Downing partnered with J. Stevens Abbott to form the Abbot-Downing Company. Together, they recognized a critical problem. Traditional carriages with metal spring suspensions were breaking apart on America's primitive roads. They needed a radical solution. The answer came from an old maritime principle, suspension by leather. Downing and Abbott perfected what they called the Thoroughbrace system, a revolutionary approach that would transform overland transportation. By the 1850s, each Concord coach cost between $1,200 and $1,500, the equivalent of $40,000 to $50,000 today. This wasn't just a carriage. It was a precision-engineered machine that required 3 months of skilled labor and 40 specialized craftsmen to build. The Abbot-Downing Company would go on to produce over 3,000 coaches, setting the gold standard for Western transportation. But it was the engineering itself that made the Concord coach legendary. The heart of the Concord coach's success was its Thoroughbrace suspension, a system so simple in concept, yet so sophisticated in execution, that it revolutionized overland travel. Instead of rigid metal springs, the coach body hung from 3-inch thick leather straps made from ox hide. These weren't ordinary straps. Each thoroughbrace required 8 to 12 layers of hand-selected bullhide, cured for months to achieve the perfect combination of strength and flexibility. The result was what engineers call a cradle effect. The leather straps absorbed vertical shocks from rocks and ruts, preventing the catastrophic wheel breakages that plagued spring-suspended carriages. But this innovation came with a notorious side effect. The coach swayed back and forth, creating that infamous rocking motion that left passengers green-faced and dizzy. Here's the engineering paradox. The Concord coach wasn't designed for passenger comfort. It was designed to protect cargo and prevent mechanical failure. The swaying that made passengers miserable was actually proof the system was working, dissipating energy through controlled motion rather than shattering rigid components. This was engineering brilliance born from brutal practicality. The Thoroughbrace system could handle loads that would destroy conventional carriages, and it could keep running day after day across terrain that had no business seeing wheeled vehicles. Each Concord coach was a masterpiece of 19th century craftsmanship. 3 months of labor, 40 specialized workers, not a single interchangeable part. The body was constructed from seasoned basswood, a lightweight hardwood chosen for its strength-to-weight ratio. The wheels, however, demanded different materials for different stresses. Elm hubs provided shock resistance at the center. White oak spokes delivered the perfect balance of flexibility and strength. Hickory felloes, the outer rim sections, offered maximum impact resistance. Every component was hand-fitted. A wheelwright would spend days shaping a single wheel, ensuring each spoke fit precisely into the hub. Each fellow matched perfectly to its neighbors. There were no templates, no standardization. Each coach was essentially custom built. Then came the painting, 5 to 8 coats of hand-applied paint. Wells Fargo coaches wore their distinctive bright red. Butterfield Overland coaches displayed deep green. These weren't just decorative choices. The multiple paint layers protected the wood from the elements and added a final seal of quality. The finished product weighed 2,500 pounds empty, yet it could carry over 3,000 pounds of passengers, mail, and cargo. Inside, 3 bench seats faced each other, upholstered in leather over horsehair padding, not for comfort, but for durability. The interior measured just 8.5 feet long, 5 feet wide, and 5.5 feet tall, with only 4 feet of usable space once passengers were seated. This wasn't luxury. This was precision engineering focused on one goal: survival under impossible conditions. Durability was built into every square inch of the Concord coach through deliberate over-engineering. Iron reinforcement bands added 200 pounds to the total weight, but extended the coach's operational lifespan to 10 to 15 years, an eternity for a vehicle subjected to daily punishment on roads that barely deserve the name. The patent leather roof served double duty as a luggage platform, reinforced to hold 1,000 pounds. Passengers' trunks, mail bags, and even express cargo rode on top, lashed down against the inevitable swaying and bouncing. At the rear, the boot, a large leather-covered storage compartment, had a 600-pound capacity. This was where the most valuable cargo traveled: mail contracts that kept the company profitable, and the infamous treasure boxes that made stagecoach robbery a frontier industry. Inside, every detail reflected hard-won experience. The leather bench cushions weren't thick, they were hard, because soft padding would compress and fail. The leather curtains weren't for privacy, they were weather protection. Essential on routes where passengers faced everything from blizzards to sandstorms. The Concord coach wasn't designed. It was over-engineered, overbuilt, and over-strengthened for one simple reason: failure in the wilderness meant death. By the 1860s, the Concord coach's reputation had spread far beyond American borders. Abbot-Downing began exporting coaches to South Africa, Australia, and South America. Anywhere gold strikes and settlement demanded reliable overland transportation. Australia's gold rushes drove massive orders. Cobb Company, the colony's largest coaching firm, operated over 6,000 horses and hundreds of Concord coaches across routes spanning the continent. These weren't American trails, they were Australian outback tracks, often worse than anything in the American West. For even rougher terrain, Abbot-Downing created a lighter variant called the mud wagon, costing just $400 to $600, and designed for routes where even the Concord's robust construction was overkill. The proof of the Concord's construction quality? Some coaches are still operational in museums after 150 years. These weren't vehicles built to last a decade. They were built to last generations. The Concord coach became something more than American technology. It became the global standard for overland passenger transport in the 19th century, exported to every continent where civilization pushed into wilderness. Operating a Concord coach wasn't just expensive. It was a massive logistical operation that required industrial-scale resources. Wells Fargo, the largest operator, owned over 700 Concord coaches at their peak in the 1860s and 1870s. But the coaches themselves were just the beginning. Operating costs reached $75 to $100 per day per route, covering horses, drivers, station keepers, blacksmiths, and constant repairs. Yet the economics made sense because of what the coaches carried. A single treasure box haul could exceed the coach's purchase price, sometimes $50,000 or more in gold, shipped from western mines to eastern banks. These weren't passenger vehicles that happened to carry valuables. They were armored transport systems that happened to carry people. Insurance rates reflected the reality. 2 to 5% of cargo value, driven by high robbery frequency and catastrophic accidents. Stage lines accepted this as the cost of doing business. A $1,500 coach could pay for itself in 2 successful treasure runs, even accounting for losses. This was frontier capitalism at its most raw: massive upfront investment, brutal operating costs, and the potential for enormous returns. If you could survive the robberies, breakdowns, and accidents that claimed roughly 1 coach in 5 over its operational lifetime. May 10, 1869, Promontory Summit, Utah. The golden spike connecting the Transcontinental Railroad was driven home, and the Concord coach's dominance began its inevitable decline. The railroad could move passengers from New York to San Francisco in 7 days for a fraction of the cost, without the bone-rattling misery of stagecoach travel. By the 1880s, most major stage routes had been converted to feeder lines, shuttling passengers to and from rail stations rather than crossing the continent. Abbot-Downing adapted, producing lighter vehicles for shorter routes. But the market had fundamentally changed. The final production year was 1899, ending nearly 70 years of continuous manufacturing. The company had produced between 4,000 and 6,000 total coaches, each one a hand-built masterpiece that had helped build a nation. Today, surviving examples are valued at $150,000 to $300,000 or more for museum-quality specimens. These aren't just historical artifacts. They're engineering marvels that achieved something remarkable. They survived their own obsolescence. Walk into any museum featuring the American frontier, and you'll likely see a Concord coach. Over 100 original coaches still exist worldwide, maintained as precious links to a vanished era. The Abbot-Downing factory site in Concord, New Hampshire, is now commemorated, a reminder that the vehicle most associated with the Wild West was actually built in a New England workshop by craftsmen who never saw the territories their creations would conquer. Hollywood immortalized the Concord coach, making it the visual shorthand for American frontier expansion. Every Western film features stagecoaches racing across dusty plains. But here's the irony. Most actors in those films were riding in vehicles more comfortable than the authentic coaches. The real Concord wasn't cinematic. It was brutal, practical, and unforgiving. Yet it worked. For 3 decades, the Concord coach was the most reliable method of moving people, mail, and wealth across the most hostile terrain in North America. It didn't achieve this through innovation in comfort or speed. It achieved this through obsessive attention to durability, through engineering that prioritized survival over every other consideration. The Concord coach didn't make the journey west pleasant. It made it possible, and in doing so, it became the vehicle that literally carried American expansion on its reinforced, leather-suspended white oak frame. Built to last, born to punish. The Concord coach was never meant to be remembered fondly by those who rode in it, but it was meant to be remembered as the engineering marvel that proved 19th century American craftsmanship could conquer distance, terrain, and time itself. If you enjoyed this deep dive into historical engineering, please subscribe for more documentaries exploring the technology that built our world. Hit the like button if you learned something new today, and leave a comment below. What other historical vehicles or technologies should we cover next?